Hello, everyone. We'll take just a moment as people join and then begin the webinar. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks to all of you who are already on the line. We're taking just a moment as people continue to join, and then we'll start the webinar. Thanks so much for joining us today. All right, I begin. Thank you all for joining us today on this exciting opportunity to share with you information on the IRMA system and the release of new audit reports from Southern Africa. So I'm Amy Boulanger, and I serve as the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, or IRMA, the Executive Director for IRMA. And I'm joined today by others who will share with us updated news on the release of audit reports of mines in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. Our speakers today joining me will also be Davidzo Muchawaya, who is our IRMA's Africa regional lead. It's wonderful to have Davidzo on with us today, not only because of her extensive experience across Africa and working in outreach to a range of different stakeholders, but also because Davidzo herself has a career of auditing and can speak from the perspective of being an auditor, including an auditor on some of the sites in the IRMA system before joining us on staff. We also have Anglo American staff joining us today, including both Stephen Bullock, the head of sustainability for Anglo American Platinum, and also responsible mining program manager Sarah Makumbe, who has experience across a number of the Anglo sites that have been participating in IRMA. So we will, before turning to the Anglo team to talk about the results of their audits and questions that you might have about performance at these different sites, things they're proud of, things they're working on, and ways they plan to improve in the years ahead. We're going to start by backing up, especially for any of you who are new to IRMA, and share with you how the IRMA system works and how an audit works, perspectives for different stakeholders and Indigenous rights holders using this system, and then turn for more specifics on these particular audits. So why is a system like IRMA needed? And this is a moment, as many of you who are tracking both climate change and the climate crisis in the world today, and mining's relationship to it, we have this increasing demand in the need for materials like lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, iron ore, and others, which goes into materials for energy transition. But in addition, we have a whole set of materials that have been used, which may not be as associated with energy transition, and the impacts that go with mining for materials that are in the products that many of us use every day around our houses, in buildings, in our vehicles, in our electronics, and otherwise. And industrial scale mining comes with a broad host of impacts that create impacts to communities and the landscapes they rely on. And we know we have Indigenous and other communities under stress separate from these impacts, and that these are often exacerbated by industrial scale extraction. So with increasing droughts, floods, risks to drinking water, increasing fires, and increasing human conflict, it becomes all the more important to look at the ways that we can reduce the impacts and the harm that are in the supply chain of many materials used by industrialized society daily. In reflection to that, we have governments around the world increasingly creating mandatory due diligence, the expectation that end brands who sell us our cars, our electronics, jewelry, and otherwise understand their supply chain and are reaching up the supply chain to reduce harm from their suppliers who in the past have been quite far away from the end brand, and that this has legally binding implications. So what is IRMA and how does it seek to work across this range of different stakeholders together? IRMA is currently the world's most rigorous and detailed standard for mining. While it's rigorous, it's not pass-fail, so a mining company can engage with a site at any level in its journey to improving environmental and social responsibility. And while the IRMA standard speaks to best practice, it provides a score along the way, and we'll talk more about that. It applies to large-scale mines anywhere in the world with a diversity of different types of mined materials. Its assessment is at the mine site, not the company level. So you will hear Sarah and Stephen today speaking about individual sites as we look at the performance and make sure that in aggregating, we don't lose the impacts to any single community along the way. So that's why these companies are doing site by site by site, and really looking at performance in each place. And finally, the IRMA system is unique in that it is equally governed. It is equally governed by civil society, communities who are most directly impacted by mining, NGOs, and labor unions working across the table from private sector leaders at mining companies customers, and at their investors in the finance sector. This is just a quick picture of the range of chapters that are in the IRMA standard. While we know that there will be different risks at different sites and there will be different levels of performance and challenge at different sites, the foundational idea is that we're not trading worker health and safety against or instead of clean water. It's not protecting Indigenous rights or addressing greenhouse gas emissions, but a comprehensive look at the type of impacts that come with industrial scale extraction, and to drive value for improvement across the range of these issues. This is our bosses. This is the IRMA Board of Directors. They fall in 6 houses, each house with 2 seats. You see the names here of the individuals who serve and the companies for which they work or the organizations with which they're affiliated. As I mentioned, they have equal governing power. That meaning that each of the 6 houses not only has 2 votes each, but 2 no votes from the same house stop a decision because they are committed to not leaving a house behind. So as they build the IRMA system and its rules, the standard and the rules for auditing, they are ensuring that it is accountable and can create value for all. So while these people do not do the IRMA audits and they are not overseeing individual reports, they are creating a system to ensure that process is accountable to each of you listening today. This gives you a sense of the purchasing sector, the customers to mining who are already members in IRMA, and creating a demand for increased transparency and then value for improved practices through the supply chain to them, including 7 car makers, a range of electronics companies, jewelry sector, household products, wind, and others. And as we shift now to members in the NGO sector and how is civil society engaging with IRMA, I'm going to allow Davidza Muchwaya to share these next slides with you before we turn then to Anglo.
Thank you so much, Emmy. So we do have members who are from civil society, and we engage with mining affected community organizations, NGOs, civil society groups, even beyond the ones that are IRMA members that you see listed in the slides. We constantly engage with those organizations, not just as a once-off, but constantly. And one area that we are seeking to improve as IRMA is to be able to make the engagement that we have with stakeholders meaningful. And to do that, we are currently implementing the IRMA outreach strategy across Africa that will see us having the engagement that we have with organizations being meaningful. Apart from that, we're also providing and continue to seek to provide a platform for diverse stakeholders to have an engagement platform with one another so that they can listen and learn from various perspectives and collaborate in efforts to advance responsible mining. Next slide, please. There are a number of organizations that have referenced IRMA, NGOs specifically, and I'm just going to go through some of them that you see on the slide. We are quite grateful to that. And specifically, some of the NGOs have referenced IRMA in the context of IRMA being rigorous, as Amy has already alluded to. Some of the other NGOs have also referenced IRMA in relation to how it facilitates the promotion of access to information and public participation within the sector. IRMA, just to give a context, shares reports publicly to various stakeholders, and we explain how this happens as we go on in the next slides. Next slide, please. We are grateful that IRMA has also been referenced by governments, by parliaments, as well as UN agencies. However, we need to stress that at IRMA, we recognize that no voluntary initiative can ever replace the need for laws and regulations that apply to the mining sites. Governments always have their roles in terms of enforcing these laws and regulations. However, we see IRMA system as a tool that can be used to support these efforts and to complement what governments are already doing. We appreciate that last year, the Chilean government referenced IRMA in the Chile National Strategy, Lithium Strategy, as a frame of reference for government to design and apply a process of stakeholder dialogue and participation. The European Parliament also referenced IRMA as a tool to guide critical raw materials legislation, referring it as a starting point. IRMA has also been mentioned in the last few years at UN climate change conferences, again as a tool to address harm, and also as a tool for climate action. Next slide, please. As you can see on the slide, is evidenced by the province of British Columbia and Canada. The First Nations used IRMA to assert their rights to free, prior, and informed consent in line with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We also see that other communities can also use IRMA as a tool to assess similar rights. And as we seek to continue to reach out to different stakeholders, more stakeholders would also continue to seek to assert those rights as they engage with mining companies. Next slide, please. So having talked about the NGO sector or civil society, I'll now shift to explaining how the audit process works and how is it held accountable. I think this is quite an important topic at IRMA because some of the questions that we receive are around how the audit process works. When we talk about IRMA audit process, we think of it as a journey because it has got various steps in it, and different companies go through this journey in different ways at different timelines. But just to give you a context, the journey starts with a self-assessment tool. This is a tool that IRMA provides to mining companies that intend to assess themselves against the IRMA standard. So the mining companies can quickly measure themselves, their performance using this tool. The self-assessment tool is exactly the same as the ones that is used by the auditors when they do the independent review. So this gives the mining company perspective and also informs them of the expectations that they will encounter during the independent review. So once companies have done the self-assessment, the next step is the independent third-party review. However, I need to mention that companies, once they do the self-assessment, they can publicly declare that they are doing a self-assessment, but they cannot make claims about the self-assessment, for example, making claims on the performance levels. So in terms of step 2, this is an independent review, which happens in mostly 2 parts, the document review, as well as the on-site audit, where auditors actually come on the mining site. The third-party audit review allows the mining site to make credible claims once completed about their environmental and social performance. They'll also be able to share the results publicly, as Anglo has done with the 3 reports that were released last week. I'll get into detail to explain how the on-site audit happens and what is involved in the process. But before I do that, I would need to explain that throughout this journey from the on-site audit, once it's completed within 18 months, a surveillance audit is done. So basically, now a surveillance audit is a periodic check that is done by the auditors once the initial audit is done. And I'm going to explain that in detail later. And after the 3 years from the date of completing the initial assessment, a full reassessment is conducted and a new achievement level is assigned, and the cycle will start again. Next slide, please. So as we are speaking about Unki today, Unki went through a surveillance audit, and we need to indicate that Unki was the first mine that was audited against the IRMA standard, and it also the first mine that is gone through a surveillance audit with the report that was recently published last week. As indicated, surveillance audits are designed as a midway check, basically checking if the mine is performing well enough to retain the IRMA achievement level. In some cases, this is not an opportunity to increase the IRMA achievement level. However, I need to draw attention to the recent IRMA board announcement relating to surveillance audits that was recently made. Recently, the IRMA board approved surveillance audit as an option for increased IRMA achievement level. This is specifically for companies that choose to release their results before the 12-month corrective action period. So in this case, this is not applicable to a mine site that decides to elect to go through the 12-month corrective action period, but for those that choose not to go through the 12-month corrective action period. And in that case, if a surveillance audit is done under such circumstances, there is opportunity for an achievement level to increase. And the upside with that is that audits are released sooner. There's an early opportunity for improvement, and stakeholders also get to have the audit results much sooner than before. Next slide, please. As discussed by Amy, IRMA is one of the most rigorous standards. And one of the things that differentiates IRMA with other standards is its transparency and it being inclusive. One of the many ways that you see, for example, is that IRMA audits are publicly announced. So 30 days prior to the audit, there's focused outreach by both auditors as well as the IRMA Secretariat to reach out to NGOs, civil society, labor organizations, stakeholders, government entities to inform them about the audit. This is done through radio broadcasts, notices in newspapers, notices that are put in accessible areas in communities where the audit is going to happen, emails that are sent out, as well as reach out that is done by IRMA Secretariat through emails or through calls to reach out to different stakeholders to inform them about the audit. And during the audit process, the auditors speak to a variety of stakeholders, including mine workers, mine-impacted communities and their representatives, civil society groups, government agencies, just to mention but a few. And this is done to get a comprehensive and holistic view of the performance of the mine. And the voices of those stakeholders are also reflected in the audit reports. For example, the audit reports that were just recently published. As discussed before, full audit reports are published on the IRMA website, and stakeholders have access to these reports. They are able to review them, come back to us with comments, and also share this reports publicly as they see fit. I'll now hand over back to Emmy so that she can go through the current engagement with the mining sector. Over to you, Emmy.
Thanks so much, Davidza. Okay, Alan, to the next slide. To give you a sense of where audits are happening in the world right now, there are mines who are formally registered in the IRMA system, more than 82 mining companies with more than 103 sites. But 60 of those sites are self-assessing. And as we said earlier, you may self-assess confidentially. There are no claims of achievement allowed against a self-assessment, but it's a way for a mining company to understand the IRMA standard, understand how they likely perform, and make improvements, because our lead purpose in the IRMA system is not to score achievement, but is to drive value for improved practices. So we want mining companies to get a good sense of where they have strengths, where they have challenges, and to improve practices and find value in the market for that effort. 24 different sites are actually piloting new draft standards, because we have new standards to apply at the exploration and development level and also in mineral processing. And there are now 19 sites in the midst of an independent audit, which results in a public audit report like you're seeing now with Anglo American, and that increases each week right now around the world. The current audit report releases we're talking about today are 3 sites in Southern Africa, all owned by Anglo American. Anglo American will also release 2 more sites in Southern Africa. And for those of you who tuned in a couple of weeks ago, they also released 2 in Brazil. And there will be also a new lithium audit report for covering company in Argentina coming up. And if you go to the IRMA website, you can see also other new active audits underway. Another Anglo American site in South Africa, ArcelorMittal's first site in Brazil, Aramet in Senegal, Gerdau in Brazil, Sibanye-Stillwater, with the first audit beginning in the United States, and also a site in South Africa, and then Sierra Resources in Mozambique. So it is an opportunity for you to engage in any of these sites, and we welcome other companies to also follow these leaders in being increasingly transparent and finding value to improve practices. All of this information is on the IRMA website. And next slide, Alan. What's particularly important in these ones is a whole set of opportunities now to engage with all the way at the raw material level. Okay, Alan. So with the Amandelbult, Mototolo, and the surveillance audit for Unki, we now have the first audit reports for mines in South Africa. We have the first surveillance audits report at Unki. With firsts, it means that there's learning all around. So as each of you read these reports, if you find information that you think is missing in there, things you have questions about, ways we can better present that information, voices that aren't heard, we certainly want to hear from you. There's an opportunity to connect value for improved practices from the mines all the way down to the end brands through this connection from IRMA audits at the raw material level all the way to the end products that many of us use every day. And Anglo American is the first company globally to have committed all of their metal mines to being audited in the IRMA system, and they have by far the most mines in that audit process, and Sarah Makumbe is an excellent resource to sharing what have they learned across that. It's worthy of note that these audits began during the COVID phase. It took years for many of these to be finished because of the difficulty to get auditors to site. And also IRMA allows an optional 1-year corrective action period to make improvements in real time before releasing audit reports, which Anglo American and the other companies thus far in audit have been taking advantage of to make improvements in real time. While certainly we can improve, this is unprecedented to have more than 170 pages of details on performance of mine sites measured against best practice, measured against a standard which is stronger than law. So please take a close look, and we want your feedback. And we also encourage you to speak directly with Anglo American about their performance and where you'd like improvements. As we give our last slides, Alan, next slide. I'm also going to say, please feel free to put questions in the chat right now, because soon we'll be shifting over to Anglo American and your questions. So please feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll be answering them live as we go. And we will not mention your names as we pose the questions to Anglo American, so you can feel free to ask questions you have, and we will just ask the questions without assigning them to a person. Again, this is simply to show that these audits began years ago, so we're particularly happy to have these ones out, and these being some of the last that began before COVID, and have more efficient review of mine sites and reports out far more quickly. Okay, Alan. In the IRMA audit reports, you'll find a summary of the findings with a score for every single chapter, as well as an average for each of the 4 main areas in the IRMA standard. And then you can open up those 170 pages and actually see, for example, if community and stakeholder engagement had 77%, where are those points coming from? What performance was found happening there? And where could improvements still be made? These are the achievement levels. So you will hear us speak about achievement level IRMA 50 and IRMA 75. What these mean is any mine who's measured against the IRMA standard, once their report is released, they achieve IRMA transparency, which means they have transparently released their performance in their audit report in detail for anyone to read. But to reach IRMA 50 or IRMA 75, a site must reach at least 50% average in all 4 areas of the IRMA standard. So you couldn't have 100% in social and 0% in your environmental chapters and be IRMA 50. It must be at least 50% performance in all 4 main areas of the standard, and the same with IRMA 75. In addition to this, the site must at least substantially meet 40 individual requirements that have been designated as critical requirements in the IRMA standard. These cover issues like human rights protection, indigenous free prior informed consent, and others, and you can find these critical requirements noted in the audit report and on the IRMA website as well. Next slide. And I'll shift back to Davidzo and then over to Stephen and Sarah.
Thank you so much, Amy. So how would stakeholders use the reports that have been recently published? As we speak about this, these are not prescriptive or an exhaustive list of how the reports can be used, but these are some of the ways that we think around how stakeholders would be able to use the reports. There are different stakeholders, and they may use those reports differently. For example, community members, mine workers, NGOs, and civil society might use the report to better understand the strengths of the mining sites, identify areas that need improvement, track the implementation of corrective actions, and also advocate for changes that are important to the local stakeholders, indigenous rights holders, and workers. And purchasers and investors may look at the report to understand the operations of the mine sites, also to get and understand affected community worker voices and perspectives, and then to use their leverage to seek more improvement from mining companies for the gaps that have been identified in the reports. And for other mining companies, they may look at the report to learn from Anglo's journey, their strengths and the challenges which are outlined in the report, or the challenges which they first in implementing their IRMA standard. And for government staff, they may also look at the report to understand the site's performance, understand and hear worker voices, community input, and ultimately to use the IRMA standard as a template to strengthen their country laws. Next slide, please. And at IRMA, we continuously seek to continuously improve. And to do that, we welcome and encourage you to give us feedback on our performance as a standard and as a system, as well as on the reports that are recently published. Next slide, please, Alan. So the go-to place to access the reports that we're talking about are listed on their slide. And if there are any specific questions with regards to the operations of the mining sites that are in discussion, those are best be forwarded to Stephen. And if there are any questions on how the audits were done, this is best forwarded to the audit firms that conducted the audit. Amandelbult and Mototolo were done by IRMA CVS, and Unki was done by SCS Global, and their emails are provided in the slide. And if the stakeholders or anyone has got a complaint, a grievance, or would like to provide feedback to Emma, we gladly encourage you to do that. You can do so through our website in any language, or through email, as well as WhatsApp. Voice and text are all welcome. And we continuously seek your feedback to improve by, if you use the contact email that is provided, would greatly appreciate your feedback, and as we continue to improve the systems and processes at EMA. Thank you. I'll now hand over to Anglo American. Stephen, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Diviza and Amy. And yeah, hello, everyone, and thanks for taking time to join the webinar today. And hopefully we can share with you some of the key learnings and outcomes of the IRMA process at Anglo American Platinum. So just moving to the next slide. So our major shareholder in Anglo American Platinum is Anglo American. Owns just on 80% of Anglo American Platinum. Anglo American is a diversified mining company operating globally, as you can see from the map, across 15 regions. Employs around about 100,000 people, with its headquarters in the UK. And then you can see on the map there the green areas. Zimbabwe and South Africa is where Anglo American Platinum predominantly operates. And if you move on to the next slide. So Anglo American Platinum operates in two countries, Zimbabwe and South Africa. That's where all of our operations, our mining operations, are based. And we operate across four mining complexes. There's the Amandelbult complex on the western limb of the Bushveld Igneous Complex. That's the ore body that we mine, and that's one of the sites for which we're presenting the results today. Then there's the Mototolo complex, which is on the eastern limb of the Bushveld complex. And then in Zimbabwe, on the Great Dyke, which is the geological ore body that we mine in Zimbabwe, there is the Unki mine. And then our fourth mining complex that we're currently busy with the IRMA process at is Mogalakwena, which is on the central limb of the Bushveld complex. The company employs round about just short of 32,000 people and is headquartered here in Johannesburg. We're the biggest refiner of PGMs globally, and PGMs are obviously made up of the platinum group metal suite, which includes platinum, palladium, rhodium, iridium, ruthenium, osmium. And we do produce some base metals, some nickel, copper, cobalt, and a few other byproducts, chrome and sulfuric acid. So we produce a number of products from our different operations. So moving on to the next slide. Just looking at a Amandelbult complex itself, I think importantly, Amandelbult complex is our oldest mining operation in our portfolio at the moment. It's what's called a conventional platinum mine, using essentially rock drilling, underground operation, and is partly mechanized. It employs in the region of 17,500 employees, and produces just over 600,000 PGM ounces annually. And I think importantly, and an achievement we're particularly proud of, is now operated for more than 3 years fatality-free. And we continue to focus on zero harm, but this is an example that deep level tabular mining can be done safely. And then in terms of IRMA, we've recently achieved IRMA 50 at Amandelbult. Then moving to the next slide, at the Mototolo complex, which, as I said, is on the eastern limb of the Bushveld, is a newer, fully mechanized operation employing just short of 4,000 people, and has operated for more than 11 years fatality-free, and is producing just short of 300,000 PGM ounces. And at Mototolo, we were pleased to be able to achieve IRMA 75, aligned with our Unki operation. And then if we go across to the Unki slide now, the next slide, please. So Unki mine, based up in Zimbabwe, as I said, and as we heard earlier, Unki has really been leading on IRMA now for a number of years, and has recently just undergone its surveillance audit, achieving IRMA 75. Also a fully mechanized underground operation, having mined for more than 11 years fatality-free, employing just over 1,200 employees, and then producing just short of a 250,000 ounces of PGM. So those are the three sites that have currently gone through the full IRMA process, and as I mentioned earlier, we are busy at Mogalakwena. So if you move on to the next slide, please. So we've obviously been busy with the IRMA process for a number of years at Anglo American Platinum, and with the support of our major shareholder, Anglo American, with Unki achieving its first certification in 2021. And then Mototolo and Amandelbult mines underwent their stage 2 audits back in 2022, and then we took the option to then go through the year-long sort of corrective action process to address the findings that were raised in those initial audits, and hence why the audit reports are only being released, having only been released recently. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Mogalakwena mine has already undergone its stage 2 IRMA audit in November of last year, sorry. And now we're busy with the corrective actions, and we'll use that year-long process to iron out the findings, and then have a follow-up towards the back end of this year. So that's the journey we've been on at Anglo Platinum. And so we're hoping by early 2025, our 4 main mining complexes would have all been through the full IRMA process. So moving to the next slide, what are sort of some of the key learnings that we've gone through at each site through this process? I mean, I think first and foremost is one needs the full site team's involvement. IRMA is definitely cuts, and the requirements cut across all disciplines. It needs the full support of line management, including the general management at site. And then also the systems and the management systems and routines one has to go through at site, touch on every single function at a particular mine site. And so this can't just be left up to the sustainability team or the environmental team on site. It really cuts across all functions, and so that really is a key lesson that we learned early on in the process, making sure we integrated IRMA into our systems and processes at the various sites. Then secondly, with IRMA really being a relatively new standard, we had to do a lot of training and capacity building for the site teams, and that's still ongoing internally to this day, to improve the sort of level of awareness around the benchmark standards that IRMA does set, and then obviously what needs to be done to achieve those. And so a lot of work has been done, again, supported by our group colleagues at Anglo American around building capacity internally. Then I think thirdly, what's really important, and as we heard a little bit earlier, the IRMA process does actually, during the audits, require a lot of engagement with external stakeholders. It's not just an internal management audit. And as a result, one has to obviously start engaging with external stakeholders on the IRMA process fairly early, so that stakeholders understand what their rights are in terms of the IRMA audit approach, how it's going to work, and also what we as the organization are then doing to try and achieve the standards. And the earlier that sort of external stakeholder engagement can start in the process, I think the better. And then clearly the auditors look for evidence, look for data, look for information. And so, we have to be able to back that up with really rigorous data management systems. So I think those are the sort of four main learnings that we've gone through, and we still continue to improve in these particular areas. So moving on to the next slide, if you have a look at really what our implementation process is. So, we've across our business, and this includes the broader Anglo American group, we've tried to look at where we've got elements of best practice that can be then shared across the different sites. So, for example, at our Amandelbult operations, some very novel use of drone technology and environmental monitoring and environmental applications. We can then use that elsewhere across the group. Then clearly it makes sense to streamline ways of working, and if we align our internal policies and management systems and so on to ensure that our systems meet the IRMA requirements, and the way we manage this business on a day-to-day basis also happen to meet the IRMA requirements, it then obviously means we're not doing this just for IRMA's sake. We're doing it in terms of how we run and operate this business. Then it's very important to continue to promote transparency with stakeholders, and continue to improve stakeholder engagement. And you will see from some of the findings in the recent IRMA reports, we have got the opportunity for some further improvement in that space. And then, all of this really is to obviously provide assurance to a lot of our external stakeholders that we are mining, responsibly. As we heard earlier on the call, 7 of the automotive manufacturers are members of IRMA. It's around about 75% of our PGMs and the metals that we mine actually end up in the automotive sector. And obviously by achieving these levels to IRMA, we can certainly demonstrate that we are a responsible miner. And then obviously we continually looking at ways of improving, and we will now take the findings from these recent IRMA reports, put management actions in place, and then continue to improve, and hopefully one day get to IRMA 100. So that's really the process that we're going through. And I think, as we saw earlier, and it was mentioned, IRMA can be a journey, and we certainly on that journey. So if you move to the next slide, then some of the main learnings from the actual reports across the various sections. So certainly on the environmental side, there's certain best practice that we can scale across our operations. There was certain waste management practices that we had at Mototolo that we can share with at Amandelbult. And so we're looking at making sure we do that across our sites and then take those same learnings and use them at Mogalakwena. On the social front, one of the main areas where we believe we still need to improve is around the monitoring and evaluation of some of our social projects, and particularly the social and labor plan projects, and actually building monitoring and evaluation criteria and metrics into those projects from the outset so that we can get a better feel for what the actual impact is that we having over and above just delivering these projects and creating a few additional jobs and so on. And then on the governance side, obviously look at how do we continue to embed in our own management systems and in our own governance practices as an organization, systems and processes that enable us to actually demonstrate that we meet the IRMA standard. And so we've got a bit of work to do there still around improving some of those governance systems and routines. And then moving on to the next slide. So, certainly what's next for us, obviously look at bringing those learnings back into the business, sharing those with other sites and improving what we do. We're then going to action detailed plans for all three of those sites to address the findings. And then we now need to start planning for surveillance, specifically at Amandelbult and Mototolo, and then putting Unki through the next cycle, which will be a full cycle. And then we'd welcome any further comments from people on the webinar or separately through the IRMA processes or directly. So yeah, I hope you've got some benefit and happy to take a few questions. Thank you.
And Stephen, we do have a few both questions and comments. So I'm going to name some, first of all, that are critical back to IRMA first. So not to Anglo, but to us and how we run this. So one, acknowledging that that one viewer in particular would like us to compress the IRMA portion of this, so we have more time to talk about the site's performance. So definitely heard we include the IRMA background for some who are new to IRMA and want to understand, because actually most of the questions are to the process. It's less right now about your operation, although we absolutely encourage more questions to come in about the operation. Anglo American is here to speak to you for the next 12 minutes on this. But so naming, please shorten the information on IRMA up front. So we'll definitely do this. The other is why can't people see one another on it? And we have done this in part to protect identity of those who come in, but some are saying they would like to be seen and have others see that they're here. So we're definitely taking that in. I want to note, because they gave me permission here to note that Benchmark Foundation in particular would like that kind of transparency on who's listening in. So thank you to those of you at Benchmarks for being here, for encouraging others to be here, and for asking questions in the chat and being willing to share your identity and naming that. There was a question around how many workers and how many community members were interviewed in the audits at both Amandelbult and Mototolo. And I don't know, I have those numbers, but Stephen or Sarah, if either of you want to take that question, I turn to you if you have it.
Yeah, I can't recall exactly offhand how many there are. I mean, we're happy to get back on that, but certainly it was across a broad stakeholder and community grouping at each of the sites.
So I can say a bit on that. Sarah, do you want me to take the answer to that? And then if you want to elaborate on it as well. So because I checked the reports. So at Mototolo, there were 23 workers spoken to, 22 government agency staff, 35 NGO and community staffers. At Amandelbult, it's 24 workers and 40 community. You don't have to scroll down the numbers I'm saying, because if you go to the IRMA website and you look at the reports, they're there. And there's a further breakdown that's included by gender, by context, by community, by what type of work they do, while still protecting identity of people who speak. So please take a closer look. And I'm not saying that these numbers are in any way representative of an entire workforce or of a community. And one thing that was raised in the chat as well that we feel very aware of, and this I think was raised also by Benchmark Foundation, the preparation for an audit is essential. We are very aware, with having released the first less than a dozen audits so far, that most of the world, especially affected communities, have no idea what IRMA is. If you come into town and you say, we're going to do an IRMA audit, you can speak. People will certainly say, who is IRMA? Why would I speak? Am I safe to speak? What kind of reprisals may come back to me as a worker or a community member if I speak? Can I be honest? What will happen with this information? Is it going to change anything anyway? We're aware of all that skepticism out there. This is key part of why Davidzo's role is here, is to do increasing outreach, particularly to civil society, to NGOs, community, and workers as well, so that they know that there is a reason to participate, that communities have agreed to no reprisals for honest engagement. And if you read the report, I think you're going to find as well critical feedback in there. You will find those who are not just applauding, but are asking for change. And then someone asked also of IRMA, is there a user-friendly plain language version of 170 pages? And this is something we've struggled with. Many standard systems put out very short reports, pass-fail, 5 pages, 10 pages, which I think everyone has agreed it doesn't really capture the feeling of those on the ground and the concerns that they have, which is part of why ours are more detailed. But I agree, most people don't want to sit down and read 170 pages. If you start at the very beginning, you can see scores for every single chapter. That's a great compressed version right there. You can find where there are strengths and where there are challenges. If your particular concern is community health and safety, or is what's happening with water, flip to just those chapters and start with those issues that you care most about as well. But if you have feedback on some type of summary, executive summary at the beginning that you don't feel minimizes the input of community members and workers, we're really receptive to that. Please let us know ways that it would be meaningful. One question I'll send to you, Stephen, is around the loss of many jobs recently. There's been a comment that losing 3,700 positions is not no harm, and I wonder if Anglo American can speak to that.
Yeah, so where we are in the process with that is last week on Monday, we did announce what's called a Section 189 process, where potentially a number of employees are impacted because of low commodity prices and the financial impact that's having on the business. And so in that Section 189 process, now we go into a formal consultation with Labour and facilitated by the CCMA, which is a Department of Labour mandated a mediation body, where the company will put forward the financial reasons as to why we need to go through a downscaling. And then there's at least a 60-day consultation period to try and look at ways of minimizing the impact of job losses. And so we right at the start of that 60-day process now, and we'll be going through the consultation and hopefully find ways to minimize the impact, to put safety nets in place around some of the social consequences of downscaling, and at the end of the 60 days then be able to say what the sort of final outcome is of that. So done very much in a consultative process with employees and with Labour, and we're right at the start of that process.
Stephen and Sarah, I'm going to compress a number of questions here. So one, so I'm going to throw you a few of them, and please take them as you can. One asks about the costs for you to participate in the audit, human resources, time consumed, and financial costs. And it also asks, can small and medium-sized enterprises participate? You don't have to worry about that other one because we'll take that. And I will share just in brief here that there is a fund that some purchasers are creating so that smaller companies, if money is a barrier, can participate. But for Anglo American, costs of participating, time and money. Also, did the process result in Minds meeting and engaging with new rights holders that you hadn't mapped and engaged with before? So how about those first two to start?
Okay, I can take the one on the costs. I think in terms of the costs that we have had to incur to do our IRMA audits, it's the costs of the certification bodies, and that will depend on the size of your mine and the extent to which they will carry out the activities. Then there's also the cost in terms of time, as has been pointed out. But the way the IRMA standard is laid out is that it is a team sport, as it covers all the areas that are already happening in the mine, from finance, human resources, waste management, all along. And what we have found is initially there's a lot of effort that goes into understanding the standard and how it's been worded, then translating it to how we are already doing the work at our operations, and then thereby, collating the evidence we need. So we feel that initially that effort is very high because it's something new, like anything new. But we've seen, for example, with the Unki surveillance that, you start having institutional memory, you remember, and it's the work that you've already been doing all along. So it's easier to incorporate. So that gets better. The effort reduces with time. And we're also working to embed this into the things that we're already doing on a day-to-day basis. In terms of engagements with new rights holders or stakeholders along the process, the IRMA process allows for you to publicly, reach out to the certification body if you want to participate in the process. So we did meet new people who were interested in our organization through the work that they've done and the questions that they asked the auditors, and we can also get to engage with them. I think what these reports have done for us, as we saw with the Unki case, was that we now have a platform for engaging with different stakeholders going forward and using that information to feed into the relationship, but also to respond because of information that's now transparent and in the public domain. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a starting point that we hope to keep on iterating on.
You had a good provocative question here about how did your corporate counsel or your media relations behave during the process, and how do they feel about the sensitivity of some of what you're sharing here? Not everything in these reports is flattering or saying Anglo American is positive. It's not what's usually thought of as PR.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if I could talk from an Anglo American Platinum perspective, and Sarah, I mean, maybe you can chat from the Anglo side, but from an Anglo American Platinum side. So firstly, the audit process does definitely make you feel a little bit more vulnerable because of the multi-stakeholder approach to it. And so, you really do need to know that when you're embarking on the process, that there are going to be questions posed directly to communities, directly to government, and so on. So it does open one up, but we believe we're a responsible mining company. We can be transparent and so on. And so that process does get advertised right at the beginning. And we've taken our media relations people along the journey. And then I also think that the IRMA approach, where one does get the year-long process to address certain findings, enables us to really put corrective action plans, start getting on top of those things, so that when the reports do come out, we've already taken certain key actions. And so, I think that this is the future. This is what responsible mining is about. Being transparent and putting those corrective actions in place. We're going to be held to account one way or the other in the modern society. And I think that being a responsible miner, this really supports that. I don't know if you want to add anything further, Sarah.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting how you could give it to corporate counsel, but in this case, the report went back to the sites who have done the work. They read it to make sure that this is a reflection of, the efforts that they have to pick up the learnings. So I think for us, to go through a process like this is certainly not for the PR and, corporate counsel and media relations. If you do it for that process, there's too many requirements that you would need to massage if you wanted to go that route. So I think for us, we are keen to really learn from the things we're doing really well, but also to see where we need to improve. So our sites can attest that they've seen these reports and it's a reflection of the work they're doing and the work they want to improve on. And that was the focus of how we've interpreted these reports, and we will interpret them going forward. Thanks.
So in summarizing the last, because we're at the top of the hour now, you have some comments coming in that are congratulating you and appreciating the transparency of Anglo American. You have others asking, how can we use these reports to drive more positive change and how to interact with the community? I put Davidzo's email right here in the chat. Davidzo's role is to help groups. Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association has picked up the Unki report when it first came out years back and used it to engage with the community and look at places where improved practice could still be built on there. So please, we would be happy to connect you with Zella and what they've done in Zimbabwe at around Unki, as those of you who are in South Africa are looking at how do you use these reports here, and others in Brazil. And with this, please, I thank you all for joining us. Please stay in touch with Anglo American and also with IRMA on how we can improve the use of these audit reports and driving for improved practice. So, thank you all for making the time to join. Stephen, Sarah, thank you for your work and your effort being here today.